The rain came early that morning, not a gentle drizzle, but the kind that seemed to wash away yesterday's dreams. Chicago streets gleamed like silver ribbons under the storm reflections of traffic lights, pulsing red and green on slick asphalt. Lucy Johnson tightened her jacket hands, trembling around a steaming cup of coffee she couldn't afford to spill. She'd been up since 4:30, delivering pastries from the small bakery on 79th Street. The radio crackled between gospel songs and news about the market things that had little to do with her life. Her world was measured in miles receipts and the soft wheeze of her grandmother's oxygen tank at home. As she parked near a curb to rest, she noticed a man sitting beneath a broken bus shelter. His coat was too thin, his shoes too clean. He looked misplaced, like he had fallen from another world and hadn't realized it yet. Lucy hesitated. The rain slid down her window like tears she refused to shed. Another delivery was waiting, another hour unpaid if she stayed too long. But the man's stillness did something to her, something she couldn't explain. She reached into her bag, pulled out half of her sandwich, and stepped into the rain. The man looked up when her boots stopped in front of him. His hair was damp, his face unshaven, and yet there was something unbroken in his eyes, a steadiness that didn't belong to the streets. He didn't ask for help. He didn't even look desperate, just lost. "Here," she said quietly, offering the sandwich wrapped in a napkin. He blinked at it, as if no one had ever done something so simple for him before. "I can't take that," he said. Voice deep, husky, touched with a British lilt that didn't fit the South Side. "Then don't think of it as taking," Lucy replied. "Think of it as sharing." A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "Sharing," he repeated, tasting the word as though it were foreign. "You'll get soaked," she said, glancing at the rain. "There's a diner 2 blocks away. At least get some warmth in you before the day kills what's left." He studied her, not the way men usually did, not with hunger or arrogance. He looked at her as if she were sunlight he hadn't seen in a while. And then he said softly, "Someone cares after all." Lucy shrugged, pretending not to notice the strange ache behind his words. "I wouldn't say that," she murmured. "I just hate seeing someone drown when there's an umbrella right next to them." She turned to go. But before she could reach her van, he spoke again. "Wait," he called out. "Can I pay you back somehow?" Lucy laughed under her breath. "You think I'm running a charity loan?" he said, still standing in the rain. "But maybe you could drive me somewhere tomorrow morning. I need a ride to the North Side." "I'll pay, of course." Something about the way he said it, measured, formal, almost rehearsed, made her pause. "Sure," she said at last. "You look like a man who needs direction." He smiled fully this time. "That makes 2 of us." His name, he told her, was Alex. No last name, no story, just Alex. When he climbed into her delivery van the next morning, he smelled of rain and clean laundry, a strange contrast to his tattered coat. Lucy noticed his hands, long steady with faint calluses that didn't match his soft accent. "You new in the neighborhood?" she asked, pulling into traffic. In a way, he replied, eyes tracing the skyline as if memorizing every imperfection. "I used to live nearby. Years ago, before everything changed." She didn't press further. People had their ghosts. She had her own. The city hummed around them, sirens' horns, the hum of a million restless dreams. Lucy focused on the road, but her thoughts wandered. Why was he here? Why did a man with that posture, that quiet confidence look like he'd forgotten what warmth was? She dropped him off near a public library. He thanked her, paid cash, and said he'd call again tomorrow if she was free. Something in his tone, calm, deliberate, made her think he wasn't used to being refused. That night, as she tucked her grandmother into bed, Lucy found herself glancing at the clock, wondering if he'd call. He did. The next morning, same time, and the next. Then, every day after. Their conversations grew from polite to personal, like a window slowly opening after years of being sealed. He asked about her grandmother, about the bakery, about the scars on her hands, the kind that only hard work can carve. She asked about him, but he always deflected. Some people are better defined by what they've lost than what they have, he once said, watching the sunrise over the lake. It sounded rehearsed, but the sadness behind it was real. One morning, she caught him sketching something on a notepad, the old bakery sign reflected in the windshield. "You draw?" she asked. "Used to," he replied, "before I learned how to turn everything I loved into a business." There it was again, that slip of truth that didn't belong to a man sleeping under bus stops. Lucy smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time to learn again. He looked at her eyes, unreadable. Maybe I already am. She didn't notice the way he watched her, not with desire, but with awe. For a man who had everything, once simplicity had become a luxury. In her laughter, he found what millions couldn't buy. At night, Owen King sat alone in a small rented room, his phone buzzing with unanswered calls from his assistant in Manhattan. "Sir, the board is waiting." He silenced it. The rain outside whispered against the window, reminding him of her. He'd once thought money could fix loneliness, but no amount of empire could fill the quiet of losing someone you loved, or the guilt of watching her die in the wreckage of your own private jet. Now, for the first time in years, someone saw him not as a man to admire, but as a man to care for. And that terrified him more than losing it all. The days blurred into weeks. Lucy began to look forward to their drives to the sound of his low voice describing the world in ways she'd never noticed. "Chicago's like a mirror," he said once. "Beautiful from afar, cracked up close." She laughed. "That makes two of us." He turned to her, eyes warm. "No, Lucy, you're not cracked. You're just real. And people mistake that for broken." The words hit her deeper than she wanted to admit. No one had ever said her name like that, as if it carried something precious. One morning, while dropping him off, she noticed a silver watch glinting from under his sleeve. It wasn't the kind of thing a man down on his luck wore. Sleek polished, engraved with the initials AK. He caught her glance and quickly pulled his sleeve down. "Old habit," he said. "I don't know how to let go of certain things." She nodded, but something inside her stirred curiosity, unease, maybe even fear. Because for all his humility, there was something too effortless about him, the way he spoke, the way he looked at the world, like he'd already owned it once. That night, her grandmother coughed through the thin walls of their apartment. Lucy sat beside her, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. "Baby," her grandmother rasped, "you look tired. You still helping that stranger?" "He's not a stranger anymore," Lucy said softly. "He's kind." Her grandmother chuckled weakly. "Kind men are rare. But remember, the devil once offered Eve kindness too." Lucy smiled. "Don't worry, Grandma. I know what I'm doing." But later, as thunder rolled outside, she caught herself wondering if she truly did. The next morning, when she arrived at their usual corner, he wasn't there. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. By the 20th, she told herself to stop caring. But when she finally pulled away, her phone buzzed with a message. "Sorry. Overslept. Meet me at the park instead." She drove there annoyed, but when she saw him feeding birds under the gray sky, her anger melted. He waved, a boyish grin breaking through the melancholy. "Couldn't let them starve," he said. "Seems I'm not the only one you've taught to share." For the first time she laughed, really laughed, and something shifted. The line between friendship and something more began to blur like the horizon after rain. Later, as she drove him through downtown, she noticed his reflection in the window, the faint scar on his jaw, the faraway look of a man who'd lost everything, but didn't know how to stop pretending he hadn't. She didn't ask about it. Some stories, she knew, reveal themselves when the heart is ready. Still, she couldn't help but wonder, who are you, Alex? And why do I feel like I've known you from another life? When he stepped out of her van that evening, he turned back and said almost to himself, "Do you ever think that maybe we meet people not by accident but by mercy?" Lucy frowned. "Mercy. Yes," he said quietly, "because sometimes God knows when we've punished ourselves enough." She didn't reply. She just watched him walk away into the misty rain, into mystery. The sound of his footsteps faded, but his words stayed. And as she drove home through the trembling city lights, she realized the strangest thing for the first time in years. The rain didn't feel cold anymore. Morning light crept through the clouds like a secret trying to be kept. The rain had passed, but its scent still lingered, that strange perfume of wet pavement and second chances. Lucy pulled up to the corner on 43rd Street, coffee in one hand, exhaustion in the other. The van's heater coughed warm air that barely reached her fingers. She had slept only 3 hours between double shifts, and her grandmother's midnight coughing rest was a luxury she'd forgotten how to claim. Then she saw him. Alex was already there, waiting, standing beside the same cracked lamppost as yesterday. His collar was turned up, his hair still damp, as if he'd been walking for hours before sunrise. She rolled down the window. "You ever heard of something called an umbrella?" Grinned. The kind of grin that made time feel slower. Wouldn't want to miss the weather's honesty. "You're weird, Alex. I've been told." He climbed in, and for a moment, silence settled between them. Not awkward, but comfortable, like a song both already knew. Their drives became routine. Every morning at 7, she would find him waiting with that same polite nod and that same quiet gaze that seemed to see more than she said. They talked not the shallow kind of talk people use to fill silence, but the kind that peeled back layers. Lucy told him about her grandmother, how she raised her after Lucy's mother disappeared into addiction and her father into debt, how the old woman still hummed Nina Simone while watering dying houseplants, believing they could sing themselves back to life. "I used to want to be a designer," Lucy said one morning, eyes on the road. "Fashion. Colors, fabrics, shapes that make women feel strong. Then bills happened. Dreams don't stand a chance against rent." Alex watched the city blur outside the window. Brick, smoke, humanity. "What made you stop?" She laughed softly. "Reality. You can't stitch fabric when the power bill's overdue." He wanted to tell her he understood, but how could he? His world had been built on inherited safety nets and million-dollar failures he could afford to make. Her world was built on survival, one overdue invoice at a time. He studied her hands gripping the wheel, strong, precise. A dancer's hands trapped in the wrong story. He told her his version of the truth, or at least a fragment of it. That he was new to the city, that he'd grown up near Boston, that he'd once worked in logistics but left after it stopped feeling human. He didn't mention the boardrooms, or the private jets, or the grave he'd stood over with guilt carved into his bones. Lucy didn't ask for more. People who had lived through pain learned not to interrogate silence, only to respect it. Still, she found herself wondering who he really was. He spoke like a man who'd seen the world from mountaintops, yet sat beside her, as though the view from her cracked windshield was enough. One morning, while traffic stalled on Lakeshore Drive, she leaned back, letting the soft hum of old R&B fill the van. "Who are you when nobody's watching, Alex?" she asked, half teasing. He turned to her, thoughtful. "Someone who's trying to remember. Remember how it feels to deserve good things." The line lingered. She didn't reply. Because somewhere deep inside, she understood that kind of ache, the one that comes after loss, when you begin to doubt whether joy still belongs to you. The days bled into each other, a rhythm of routes and unspoken comfort. They passed graffiti-stained walls, mothers dragging kids to school, men selling newspapers. No one bought anymore. Every turn became familiar, every silence a conversation. Sometimes he'd ask her to keep driving past his stop. "No destination today," he'd say. She would roll her eyes, but oblige, watching as he stared out the window, like he was searching for something he'd lost between skyscrapers. Once she teased, "You realize gas isn't free, right?" He smiled faintly. "You'll have to send me the bill someday." She smirked. "I already am. It's called mileage of patience." It wasn't love yet, not the kind that burns, but it was something gentler, something dangerous in its quietness. The city began to feel smaller, warmer, as if every route bent slightly toward each other. But even comfort casts shadows, and Lucy began to notice his small absences, the times he'd go silent, mid-conversation, eyes drifting toward memories she couldn't see. The way he sometimes spoke of loss without naming names. She wanted to ask, but fear stopped her, fear that if she asked, he'd vanish, and the morning light would lose its color again. One evening, as she prepared her grandmother's dinner, her phone buzzed. "Alex, you free tomorrow afternoon?" "Lucy, why planning to pay me back for all the free rides, Alex? Maybe I just need someone to keep me from getting lost." She almost smiled, then frowned. Getting lost. That was his thing, his way of existing in a world that once belonged to him. The next day, he wasn't waiting at their usual spot. Instead, he texted an address uptown. When she arrived, she froze. The building wasn't some shelter or cafe. It was the King Tower, a glass monolith slicing the sky, the tallest in Chicago. Through the windshield, she stared at it, the name faintly engraved on the stone, King Enterprises. Her heart raced. Coincidence, she told herself. Chicago was full of kings. Still, the thought clung like rain to her skin. When he finally emerged from the building, dressed not in his usual frayed coat, but in a crisp white shirt and dark slacks, she forgot how to breathe. He looked different, collected, dangerous in his calm. "Long story," he said as he climbed in. "Just helping an old friend with some paperwork." She said nothing, but her instincts whispered louder than his charm. "You don't belong where you claim to." As they drove toward the south side, she couldn't help herself. "So, that friend of yours works in that giant glass tower?" "Something like that. Must be nice having friends with offices that kiss the clouds." He chuckled. "You'd be surprised how lonely it feels up there." Lucy turned to look at him. His smile didn't reach his eyes. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of him stepping out of that building replayed in her mind, the confidence, the way people seemed to move around him, not beside him. He wasn't just another man running from his past. He was something else entirely. And yet, she still wanted to see him tomorrow. The next morning, they drove in silence until he finally spoke. "Do you ever feel like life's testing how much you can lose before you stop hoping?" She thought of her mother, of the bills stacked on the counter, of the nights she'd prayed for a miracle that never came. "Yes," she whispered, "but I also think hope's stubborn. It sticks to you like smoke." He looked at her, then really looked. You're the first person who's ever said that, like it's a good thing." "Maybe it is," she said. "Maybe it means I haven't drowned yet." He smiled, a real one this time, and she realized how beautiful he looked when he forgot to guard himself. Later that week, he asked to stop by the lake. They sat on the hood of her van watching the water shimmer under fading daylight. "I used to come here with someone," he said quietly. "Used to, she's gone now. I'm sorry." He nodded. "So am I." The wind carried silence between them, filled with things neither dared to confess her fear of loving someone who might leave his fear of being loved for the wrong reasons. As night fell, Lucy's phone buzzed with a message from her landlord, another warning about late rent. She closed it quickly, not wanting him to see. But he noticed anyway. "You okay? Fine. Just life stuff." He hesitated. "If you ever need help." She cut him off. Don't what? Don't look at me like I'm something you can fix." The words hung in the cold air. He didn't respond, and she regretted them instantly. But something inside her pride, maybe pain, needed to keep that distance. She didn't want pity. Not from him, not from anyone. When she dropped him off that night, he lingered a moment before getting out. "Lucy," he said softly, "if I ever disappoint you, promise me you'll ask why before you walk away." She frowned. "Why would you say that?" He smiled faintly. "Because I have a habit of hiding the truth until it's too late." Then he closed the door, disappearing into the shadowed street. That night, sleep wouldn't come to either of them. Lucy lay awake, thinking of the way his voice cracked on the word truth. And miles away, in a penthouse office, lit by city lights, Owen King stared at a photo of himself on the cover of Forbes' face, half hidden by shadow. He touched the glass, the reflection of a man the world thought they knew. Tomorrow, he told himself, he'd come clean. Tomorrow, he'd tell her who he really was. But he didn't know that tomorrow had its own plans, and that secrets once set in motion rarely wait for permission to unravel. Snow arrived early that year, uninvited and impatient, the kind that silences a city before dawn, blanketing everything in white, even the noise of loneliness. By nightfall, Chicago was a map of frozen veins, streets glazed in ice lamplight trapped in crystals, the wind howling like it had something to prove. Lucy drove slower than usual, her van rattling like a tired animal. The heater groaned, fighting a losing battle against the cold. She had one last delivery, a box of pastries for a hospital downtown. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "No good ever comes from driving in storms, baby." But rent didn't wait for the weather, and neither did survival. Halfway down an empty stretch of Roosevelt Avenue, the engine coughed twice, then died. The headlights flickered once before surrendering to darkness. She slammed her fist against the steering wheel. Not tonight. Please, not tonight. Snow gathered on the windshield, whispering against glass. Lucy stepped out, breath visible in the icy air. Her boots sank into slush as she popped the hood. Steam rose from the engine like a sigh. She didn't know much about cars, only that this one had been her lifeline for years. Without it, there'd be no work, no money, no chance of keeping the lights on. Her phone battery blinked at 3%. No signal. The wind bit her cheeks, but she refused to cry. The last thing she'd ever give the world was the satisfaction of seeing her break. Then, through the swirl of snow, she saw headlights approaching. A car slowed beside her van. The window rolled down, and a familiar voice cut through the storm. "Need a hand?" She turned, heart stuttering. "Alex." He smiled, not his usual controlled one, but something warmer, almost relieved. "You really have a talent for finding trouble. You really have a talent for showing up in it." she shot back, half laughing, half shivering. He parked, grabbed a flashlight from his car, and joined her under the hood. The beam of light painted their faces gold against the blue night. "I can handle it," she said, teeth chattering. "Right," he teased softly. "That's why your engine's smoking like it's auditioning for hell." She wanted to argue, but the warmth in his tone disarmed her. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing pale wrists and expensive-looking cuffs she hadn't noticed before. "You're gonna ruin your shirt," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "It's survived worse board." He stopped himself. Storms." Lucy raised an eyebrow, catching the slip, but she said nothing. He bent over the engine, his breath clouding the cold air. Grease smudged his fingers, the first imperfection she'd ever seen on him. "You actually know what you're doing?" she asked, trying to hide her smile. He looked up, eyes glinting with amusement. "You'd be surprised what you learn when life strips you of everything familiar." Something in his voice, that quiet ache beneath the humor, made her chest tighten. Minutes passed in a rhythm of clinking tools and unspoken thoughts. The snow softened, falling slower now, as if the world itself was watching them in stillness. Lucy stood beside him, holding the flashlight. Every time he leaned closer, she caught the faint scent of cedar and rain, a smell that didn't belong to this side of town. "Try it now," he said, finally straightening up. His breath came out in clouds. She climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared back to life. Her shoulders sagged in relief. When she looked back, Alex was leaning against her van, smiling through the snow. "Guess I'm good for something after all." She laughed, the sound surprising even herself. Not bad for a guy who claims to be broke. "Maybe I'm just resourceful." "Resourceful people don't drive Audis," she said, glancing at his car. He grinned. "Maybe I borrowed it." "From who?" "Someone who doesn't need it tonight." Lucy shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're full of mysteries." He looked at her for a moment too long. "And you keep trying to solve them." They ended up sitting inside the van to warm up. The air between them felt different now, not charged, but alive. Lucy rubbed her hands together, blowing into them. "God, I can't feel my fingers." "Here," Alex said, offering his hands. She hesitated, then placed hers inside his palms. His skin was warm, impossibly warm, like sunlight trapped under his skin. He didn't move, didn't say anything. He just held her hands, as if they were something fragile he didn't know how to deserve. "Better," he whispered. She nodded, but her throat was too tight for words. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows like slow-moving stars. For the first time in a long time, Lucy wasn't thinking about bills or loneliness or the weight of her grandmother's oxygen tank. She was thinking about this moment, two strangers in the quiet middle of nowhere, sharing warmth that had nothing to do with the heater. He looked at her, then eyes, soft, unreadable. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Yeah, she must have been trouble." He smiled faintly. She was beautiful, fearless. She believed she could fix broken things. "What happened to her?" He looked away. "I did." The silence that followed was heavier than the snow. Lucy wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his face told her not to. Instead, she said softly, "You ever think people cross paths for a reason?" He turned back to her, his gaze steady. "I think sometimes the reason doesn't show up until it's too late." She didn't know why, but those words hurt like hearing the echo of a goodbye that hadn't been said yet. They sat like that for a long time, until the snow eased into mist. Finally, he spoke again. "Let me drive behind you, just in case the van gives up again." She smirked. "You planning to stalk me home, Mr. Mechanic?" "Only professionally," he teased. Then more quietly, "It's safer that way." She didn't argue. There was something in his tone, protective, almost pleading, that made her heart stumble. By the time she parked outside her apartment, the storm had melted into silence. She turned off the engine and looked in the mirror. His car idled behind hers, headlights cutting through the fog. He stepped out, walking toward her with that same calm presence that always seemed to steady her chaos. "Text me when you're inside," he said. "I don't have your number." He smiled, handing her his phone. "Now you do." She typed her name, then hesitated before hitting save. "What do I put you under?" she asked. He thought for a moment, then said softly, "Just Alex." When she reached the door, she turned back. He was still standing there, snow falling around him, face half hidden under the streetlight. It hit her then, the strange familiarity of him, like she'd met him before in a dream or in another life where people weren't divided by luck and loss. Something deep inside her whispered that he didn't belong to her world, and yet he fit into it too easily. That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. Her hands still carried the phantom warmth of his. She kept replaying his words, "I learned a lot from losing everything." Who was he really? And what kind of loss could teach a man to look at life like that, half grateful, half broken? Outside, the wind brushed against her window, soft as a breath. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. For the first time, that terrified her. Across town, Owen sat by the window of his penthouse suite, watching the same snow drift through the same sky. He'd told his assistant to cancel tomorrow's board meeting, told the world to wait. On the table beside him lay a single photograph, him and a woman with dark hair, smiling under sunlight. A life that no longer existed. He traced a finger across the image, then looked toward the city's south side, where an old delivery van was probably cooling off in the dark. "She smiles like you did," he whispered to the ghost of the woman he'd lost. "Only braver." And though neither of them knew it yet that night, that broken-down van that borrowed warmth had changed something irreversible. Because sometimes love doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly through a broken engine, a borrowed wrench, and a moment when two lonely people forget the world long enough to believe in it again. Spring thawed the city slowly like a cautious apology. The snow melted from the rooftops, dripping into puddles that mirrored fragments of sky. On those soft mornings, Lucy found herself smiling, without reason. The kind of smile that grows when you realize someone has quietly rearranged your heartbeat. Alex, or at least the version of him she knew, had become a constant. Coffee runs turned into long walks. Errands became excuses. Their worlds overlapped in small, fragile ways. The way he'd bring her soup when her grandmother caught a cold, or the way she'd leave fresh bread at his door pretending it was extra from work. They never called it dating. It just became that. For Lucy, he was simple, a man without ego, someone who listened more than he spoke. She didn't know where he lived, only that he was renting a room near the lake. He never talked about family, never mentioned the past. But when he looked at her, she felt seen, truly seen, in a way she didn't know she'd been missing. For Owen, she was oxygen. Her laughter filled the hollow space where grief used to echo. Her small apartment with its peeling wallpaper and smell of cinnamon candles felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. She never asked for anything, not his last name, not his secrets, not even an explanation for the expensive watch he occasionally forgot to hide. Maybe that's why he kept coming back, because she didn't love Owen King, the name printed on Forbes covers. She loved the man who knew how to fix a van, who still believed in something good beneath all the ruin. The first time she brought him home, her grandmother's eyes lingered too long on him. He stood by the doorway, shoulders slightly bowed, hands folded like a schoolboy, meeting his teacher. "Well," the old woman said, her voice soft, but sharp as wisdom. "This one's polite. But he's got the eyes of someone who's lost more than he'll ever say." Alex smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're not wrong, ma'am," he said quietly. Lucy frowned, noticing the flicker in his expression, the quick, practiced way he masked sadness behind charm. But before she could ask, her grandmother chuckled and took his hand. "Good. Loss humbles a man. Just don't let it define him." That night, Lucy sat by the window after he'd left the glow of the streetlight tracing gold through her curls. He was everything she wasn't supposed to want, mysterious, guarded, maybe even broken, and yet she couldn't stop. She told herself it was temporary, a season. But deep down, she was already rewriting her life around him. Still, something about him didn't fit. The way he sometimes paused before answering simple questions. The way his phone calls came at odd hours, in voices she couldn't quite hear. The way his eyes, even when smiling, carried the weight of a man who'd seen the world from a height he was afraid to admit. One evening they drove out to the pier. The sky was the color of ash and honey, the lake calm as glass. Lucy leaned against the railing, the wind tangling her scarf while Alex stood behind her, close enough to feel her heartbeat, but not close enough to claim it. "You ever wonder," she said, "what your life would be like if one choice was different?" He exhaled, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Every day." When she turned, she caught something in his face, guilt or maybe grief. "Was it love?" she asked gently. "The thing you lost?" He hesitated. "It was everything." "Do you still miss her?" His silence was answer enough. For the first time, Lucy felt jealousy not of another woman, but of the past itself, the kind of love he'd buried so deep it still cast a shadow over his smile. Weeks passed. They fell into rhythm again, pretending peace could last if they didn't name it. But love, built on half-truths, always trembles before the fall. It began one afternoon in her kitchen. He was helping her fix a cabinet hinge sleeves, rolled up, laughter easy. The radio hummed in the background, a jazz station that filled the silence with warmth. His phone buzzed on the counter. He ignored it twice until it flashed again with a name across the screen. King Holdings, private line. Lucy froze. Her eyes darted to the name, then to him. He caught her look too late. A beat of silence stretched between them. "King?" she asked softly. He wiped his hands on a towel. Voice, calm, but too smooth. "An old client. Logistics company I worked with before. Sounded like they're calling you pretty often for someone old," she said, trying to sound light. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "They're persistent. Comes with the territory." He changed the subject, asked about her grandmother's health, about the bakery, and just like that, the conversation moved on. But something had shifted. For the first time, Lucy felt the distance between them, the invisible line dividing truth and pretense. That night, as she washed dishes, her grandmother spoke without looking up from her crossword. "You trust him?" Lucy frowned. What kind of question is that? The kind people ask when they see a storm coming. Lucy dried her hands slowly. "He's good to me." "I didn't ask if he's good to you," the old woman said. "I asked if he's good for you." The words sank into her chest like stones. She didn't answer, because she didn't know. Meanwhile, miles away, Owen stood alone on the balcony of his penthouse. The city pulsed beneath him, a kingdom of glass and ambition he no longer recognized. His assistant's voice echoed from the intercom. "Sir, the press is requesting a statement about your sabbatical. Should I tell them you're extending it?" He didn't reply. Instead, he looked down at his hands, still faintly stained from fixing Lucy's cabinet, a smear of ordinary life he didn't want to wash away. He should have told her the truth. But truth required courage, and courage meant risking the one piece of peace he had left. He couldn't bear the thought of her eyes turning cold when she realized who he really was, a man whose empire was built on the kind of privilege she spent her life surviving. A few days later, Lucy found him waiting outside the bakery, leaning against her van, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired, almost haunted. "Morning," she greeted softly. "Morning," he echoed. They drove in silence for a while. The city buzzed around them. Kids heading to school buses hissing in the cold, the hum of ordinary life, carrying on as if nothing were fragile. Finally, she asked, "You ever wish you could just disappear?" He smiled faintly. "I already did." She looked at him, searching his face. "Then what are you doing here?" His voice dropped to a whisper, trying to find something worth coming back for. Her heart stuttered. The sincerity in his tone made her forget the doubts clawing at her mind. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The secrets, the lies, even the word king burned into memory. Later that night, as she walked him to the door, he paused. "Lucy," he said softly, "if I ever seem far away, it's not because I want to be. It's because sometimes the world I came from doesn't let go easily." "What does that even mean?" she asked, frowning. He looked at her for a long, painful moment, as if deciding whether to confess or stay safe behind the lie. Then he smiled instead. "It means I'm grateful to have met you." He kissed her forehead gently, then walked into the night. When the door closed, Lucy leaned against it, her chest aching with something she couldn't name. She wanted to believe him, to hold on to the good, the warmth, the version of him that made her laugh in the middle of chaos. But deep down, a voice whispered what she didn't want to hear. "You can't build forever on a mystery." Outside, a car engine started, sleek, quiet, expensive. She looked through the window just in time to see the faint reflection of his taillights vanish down the street. For the first time, she wondered if she'd fallen for a man or a mirage. The rain came back that night, not gentle like forgiveness, but hard and relentless like the sky had run out of patience. Lucy stood by her window, listening to it hammer the glass. The city outside blurred into streaks of silver and shadow. Alex had said he'd stop by. She told herself she didn't care anymore, but she kept checking the clock anyway. The truth was, something in him had been pulling away these past few days. There were missed calls, distant smiles, silences too long to be accidental. Every time she asked, he brushed it off with a half smile. Just work stuff. She wanted to believe him. God, she needed to believe him. Because loving him had become a habit, like breathing between heartbreaks. When the knock finally came, it startled her. He stood there, drenched from the storm hair slick against his forehead, a folder tucked under one arm. "Sorry," he said. "Got caught up." She let him in, though something in her chest tightened as she did. He placed the folder on her kitchen counter, shrugging off his coat. The smell of rain and cologne filled the room, familiar, dangerous. They talked, or tried to, about nothing, about everything. But beneath every word lay the question neither dared to ask. "What are we doing?" Later, he excused himself to take a phone call outside. Lucy began cleaning the table, her hands moving out of habit. That's when she saw it, a wallet half hidden under the folder. It was sleek black leather, embossed with initials in silver. She'd seen him pull it out once to pay for coffee, but never thought twice about it. Tonight, though, curiosity slipped in where trust once lived. She opened it. Inside, credit cards lined up like quiet soldiers, elegant, corporate, expensive. And then one caught her eye, Owen King Holdings. Her breath caught. Her mind tried to reject what her eyes already knew. The name echoed like thunder in her head, King. The name she'd seen flash on his phone. The name he'd laughed off, lied about. For a moment, the room spun. The rain outside grew louder, like applause for betrayal. She didn't hear him come back in until his voice broke the silence. Lucy. He froze when he saw what she was holding. The wallet, the card, the truth. Their eyes met hers, sharp with disbelief, his heavy with resignation. He didn't reach for it, didn't try to lie this time. He just stood there, the air between them thick with everything he hadn't said. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked, trembling but fierce. "Who are you, Alex?" He took a breath, steady but pained. "I told you my name." She laughed, bitter, hollow. "No, you told me a version of yourself you thought I'd love." "Lucy, don't." Her voice sliced through the room. "Just tell me one thing. Was any of this real?" He looked at her, and in that look, she saw the man she had loved and the man he truly was. "It was the only thing that's ever been real," he said quietly. "But truth doesn't heal when it comes too late." She slammed the wallet on the table, tears burning in her eyes. "So what was this? Some social experiment, you slumming it for fun, testing how the other half lives?" "Stop," he said, his voice low. "Were you bored, Owen King?" She spat his name like poison. "Was I your charity project?" He flinched, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes, not of losing face, but of losing her. "No," he said, stepping closer. She cut him off. "You lied to me every day. You looked me in the eyes and pretended to be someone else." He swallowed hard. "I didn't want your love for him, for the billionaire, for the name. I wanted to know if someone could love the man underneath it." Her tears fell freely now, anger dissolving into heartbreak. "And you decided I was your test subject." He shook his head, desperate. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I just wanted to feel something human again." "Congratulations," she whispered. "You found it. And then you destroyed it." The storm outside surged, wind howling through the cracks of the window frame. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was rain colliding with glass, 1,000 tiny goodbyes. He took a hesitant step forward. "Lucy, please, don't." Her voice broke. "You had a choice. You could have told me the truth. I would have understood." "No, you wouldn't." His words came out sharp, defensive. "You would have seen my name before you saw me. Everyone does." "I'm not everyone," she said, her voice trembling. "I know," he whispered. "That's why I stayed." She turned away, unable to look at him. The weight of the lie pressed down like gravity. Every memory they'd shared, the laughter, the long drives, the warmth, now felt like props in a story she hadn't agreed to play in. "Do you even know what it's like to fight for scraps?" she asked, her tone soft, but slicing. "To count every dollar, to pray the car starts to work until your body forgets how to rest. And you came here pretending to be one of us. That's not love, Alex. That's cruelty, dressed as curiosity." He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his face. "I wasn't pretending to be poor. I was trying to be real." She laughed through her tears. "Real? You've never had to choose between dinner and rent. You don't get to borrow poverty like it's a vacation." The silence that followed was unbearable. He reached for the wallet, slow, deliberate. His fingers brushed against hers. "I'm sorry," he said, barely audible. "I didn't mean to hurt you." She pulled her hand away like his touch burned. "Then why does it hurt this much?" He had no answer, just the look of a man watching everything he didn't know he needed slip through his fingers. Finally, she picked up the wallet and threw it toward him. "Take your name back," she said, voice shaking. "Take your money, your lies, all of it. I don't want to see you again." He didn't move at first, just stared at her, drenched in regret, helpless against the consequences of his own deception. Then he nodded once quietly, the way a man does when there's nothing left to save. He turned toward the door, but before he stepped out, he looked back one last time. "I never wanted to be a lie," he said. "You made me wish I wasn't one." And then he was gone. Lucy stood there long after the door closed, the storm raging louder outside. Or maybe it was inside her now. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the floor, sobbing into her hands. For the first time, she didn't know which hurt more, that he had lied or that she still loved him anyway. The wallet lay on the table half open. The silver initials glimmered in the dim light. AK. She stared at them, hating them, missing them, wishing she could forget both the man and the name. Outside, the city trembled under thunder. Somewhere across town, Owen sat in his car, watching the rain blur his reflection in the windshield. He could have gone back to his world, the boardrooms, the headlines, the empire waiting for him. But all he saw was the look in her eyes when she said his name, like it was a curse. He whispered into the quiet, "You were the only thing that felt true." The storm swallowed his words. By midnight, the streets were littered with puddles, each one reflecting pieces of a story that could no longer be repaired. But the sky, as if merciful, began to lighten near the horizon. Faint, hesitant, a promise of something that might come after the ruin. A month can feel like a lifetime when silence replaces love. For Owen King, time didn't move forward. It only circled back, again and again, to the image of a woman standing in the rain, tears mixed with thunder. He had returned to the top floor of his glass tower, King Holdings, a kingdom of brilliance and control. Meetings resumed, deadlines returned, and the world once again bowed to his name. On paper, he was thriving. In truth, he was disappearing. He walked through corridors lined with ambition, nodded at executives whose smiles were rehearsed, and signed deals worth millions without feeling a thing. They said he'd come back sharper, more focused, more ruthless. They were wrong. He wasn't sharper. He was hollow. Every evening, as his car crossed the Michigan Avenue Bridge, he'd glance at the water below, black, moving, endless, and think of her. Of the day she split her sandwich in half. Of how she'd said, "You should find shelter," as if she weren't the only one saving him. He'd replay it frame by frame, as if he could edit his choices. But love doesn't allow rewrites, only consequences. Lucy had learned that lesson too. Life didn't stop for heartbreak, it just changed shape. The city carried on indifferent as she drove her delivery routes in silence. She'd memorized the map of avoidance. No detours past the coffee shop where he'd wait for her. No deliveries near the park bench they once shared. No glances toward the skyline that bore his name. Her van had become a cocoon, a moving cell of memories she refused to unlock. But even avoidance couldn't keep loss away. Her grandmother's health had worsened. The old woman, once full of gentle fire and humor, now spent most days sleeping near the window. Her breaths shallow, her words rare. On the last night, Lucy held her hand, fragile, papery, but still warm. "You should rest, Grandma," she whispered. The old woman smiled faintly, her eyes still sharp. "Rest is for the finished baby. You're not finished yet. I don't know what to do anymore." "Then do what scares you most." Her grandmother's hand tightened weakly around hers. "You can't drive through life forever, Lucy. Sooner or later, you have to park long enough to live." Those were the last words she ever said. The funeral was small, a few neighbors, a few flowers, and a city that never paused long enough to notice another goodbye. Lucy stood alone beside the grave, holding the only photo she had left, her grandmother laughing on the porch apron, dusted with flour, sunlight, turning her hair silver. She thought of Alex, of how he'd once told her, "Grief never leaves, it just changes address." For the first time, she understood what he meant. But she didn't cry. Not then. She'd cried enough for one lifetime. Instead, she went home, cleaned out the apartment, and found a small envelope tucked inside her grandmother's old Bible. Inside was a note written in shaky cursive. "You can't drive forever to escape the past, Lucy. At some point, you have to decide where you're going." She sat on the floor for hours, reading those words until they blurred. Outside, the world went on sirens, laughter, rain. Inside, something quietly shifted. For years, she'd driven to survive. But survival wasn't the same as living. Her grandmother had known that. Alex had known that too, even if he'd gone about it all wrong. 2 weeks later, Lucy filled out a university application. She hesitated at the line for career goal pen, hovering, unsure what to write. Then she thought of all the women she'd met on her routes, single mothers, exhausted nurses, girls with quiet dreams that never made it out of small apartments. She thought of her grandmother's voice, "Do what scares you most." And she wrote, "To create a foundation that helps women rise again, starting with myself." It wasn't easy. Classes meant long nights, part-time shifts, and a stack of debt she didn't want to think about. But for the first time in years, she woke up with purpose instead of fear. The first day she walked into the community college's old lecture hall, her heart thudded like it was running to catch up with her future. Around her were students half her age, but she didn't care. She was there. She'd chosen to show up for herself finally. Still, sometimes between lectures, her mind drifted back to him, to his quiet smile, to the warmth of his hands, to the way he'd said, "I just wanted to be real." And every time she remembered, she hated herself a little, not for loving him, but for still missing him. Meanwhile, Owen tried to bury his feelings under numbers. He'd bought another company, closed another deal, built another tower that scraped another piece of the sky. But none of it filled the silence in his apartment. He didn't go back to the lake, didn't touch his piano. Every object around him felt like a monument to what he'd lost. He'd deleted her number, but never blocked it, some pathetic hope lingering in the spaces between self-respect and longing. Sometimes he'd type a message, "I'm sorry I miss you. Please let me explain." But he never hit send, because what could he say that would undo a lie? Then one evening, after another endless meeting, he found himself driving aimlessly through the city. Instinct, not logic, took the wheel. He crossed the bridge again, the same one he used to pass every night when she was still part of his life. Below, the river shimmered under streetlights, and in its reflection, he saw not the man he'd become, but the man he'd tried to be with, her human, fallible enough. He parked by the curb and just sat there, letting the city move around him. The air smelled of rain and distant music. For a moment, he imagined her still out there, maybe driving her van through the night, maybe humming along to old R&B, maybe forgetting him bit by bit. The thought gutted him, and yet beneath the ache, there was something else: pride. She'd survive him. He knew she would. Maybe that was the truest proof of love, wanting someone to heal, even if it meant without you. A few weeks later, Lucy visited the university's community center. A flyer caught her eye. Grant applications open for women-led nonprofit initiatives. She smiled, small, determined. She didn't know how, but she'd find a way. Her grandmother's words echoed again. "You can't drive forever." Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to start building. That night, she opened her laptop and began drafting a proposal, the New Dawn Foundation, empowering women to rewrite their stories. Every sentence felt like stitching herself back together, one line of hope at a time. When she finally closed the laptop, exhaustion hit, but it was the good kind, the kind that comes from moving forward. Outside, the city was quiet, and somewhere across the skyline, a man stood on a balcony, looking at the same moon, wondering if forgiveness still had a direction. Neither knew it yet, but fate was already circling back, quietly, patiently waiting for the day their paths would cross again. Not as savior and survivor, not as liar and victim, but as two people who had learned that love, like healing, requires distance first and courage after. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between bills and flyers. Lucy almost threw it away, but the name on the envelope stopped her. The New Dawn Foundation Opening Gala. Inside the letter read, "You have been nominated to serve as a community advisor for the New Dawn Foundation's first initiative in Chicago." Her breath caught. She hadn't applied for anything. She didn't even know who had nominated her. The letter ended with a quote, "Change begins with those who dare to believe again." It sounded familiar, too familiar. A year had passed since she last saw him, since the night truth tore through love, like lightning through glass. In that time, she'd built herself from the rubble, finished her degree. Her proposal for women's empowerment had quietly gained attention online. Someone had read it, someone powerful enough to turn an idea into reality. And now this. The gala was set at the city's new cultural center, an elegant space of glass and steel washed in warm light. She told herself she was only going because of the opportunity, because this was bigger than her, bigger than the past, because she was finally ready to step into the future, even if part of it still wore his name. The night of the event, Chicago glittered like a promise. Snow flurried in the air again, the first of the season, soft and silent. Lucy arrived early, her dress simple but graceful hair pulled back in a way her grandmother would have approved of. She took a breath before stepping inside. The hall was alive with music and conversation, a hum of wealth and purpose. She moved through the crowd, like someone watching a movie she wasn't sure she wanted to star in. Then a familiar voice echoed from the stage. "Good evening, everyone." She froze. The crowd parted in her mind, leaving only him standing at the podium beneath golden lights. Owen King. The name rolled through the room like thunder. He looked composed, calm, impossibly polished, the same man the world had always seen, but never the one she had known. Yet beneath the suit, beneath the poise, she could still see it, that flicker of something human in his eyes. Her heart betrayed her, a single hard beat. He spoke slowly, carefully, like a man balancing between guilt and redemption. "When I stepped away from my company last year," he began, "I didn't know who I was anymore. I had wealth, success, all the things people are told to chase. But I had lost sight of something far simpler, something I once took for granted." He paused, eyes sweeping over the audience, and then they found hers. It wasn't an accident. He saw her. His voice softened. "This foundation, the New Dawn, was created to honor the people who remind us that dignity is worth more than fortune, that kindness can't be bought, and that love, when it's real, changes us." The crowd clapped politely, unaware of the silent storm passing between two hearts. Lucy stood still, her pulse loud in her ears. He continued, "This initiative is dedicated to someone who taught me that truth isn't a weakness. It's the only kind of strength worth having." His eyes didn't leave hers. The woman who gave half her sandwich to a stranger in the rain and made him want to be a better man. The applause that followed felt distant, muted, like an echo underwater. She couldn't move. After the speech, she tried to slip out quietly. But fate, as always, had other plans. Lucy. She stopped, slowly turned. He was there just a few steps behind her. The crowd buzzed around them, but in that moment, the world shrank to two people and the weight of everything unsaid. "You came," he said softly. "I didn't know it was you I was coming to," she replied. He nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. "Maybe that's the only reason you did." She wanted to walk away. She wanted to stay. "Why now, Alex?" she asked quietly. "Why this?" He took a breath. "Because I couldn't fix the past, but I could build something worthy of what it taught me." His words were careful, almost rehearsed, but his eyes were raw. "You think building a foundation erases what happened?" she asked. "No," he said, "but maybe it honors it." They stood in silence for a while. Around them, laughter and music filled the room, a soundtrack to a moment too fragile to belong here. Finally, she said, "I don't hate you anymore." He smiled faintly. "That's a start. But I don't trust you either." He nodded. "That's fair." Something in his calmness disarmed her, the way he didn't beg, didn't defend himself, didn't try to make her feel guilty for still hurting. He simply stood there, as if waiting for her to believe in his sincerity, even just for a second. Later, as the event drew to a close, an organizer approached her. "Ms. Johnson, the board would love to speak with you. Mr. King mentioned your proposal. It inspired part of the foundation's mission." Lucy blinked. What? "He said your work was the heart of the new dawn." When the woman left, Lucy turned back toward the stage. Owen was speaking with donors, his expression calm, but his gaze drifted toward her every few seconds, as if checking that she was still there. Something in her chest loosened, not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Because maybe redemption didn't come from grand apologies. Maybe it came from proof, from action, from someone finally showing up differently than before. When she left the building, the snow had stopped. The night air was cold, crisp, full of unsaid things. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, a voice called behind her, "Lucy." She turned. He was standing on the steps, coat unbuttoned, tie loose, looking more human than she'd seen him in a long time. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. He just said, "Thank you for not looking away this time." She held his gaze, and for the first time in a year, didn't flinch. "Don't make me regret it," she said softly. Then she walked away. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the invitation again. The New Dawn Foundation. She thought of her grandmother, of the note she'd left behind, "You can't drive forever," to escape the past. Maybe she wasn't running anymore. Maybe she was finally turning around to face it. Outside, the city lights flickered against her window, small, steady, unafraid. And miles away, on a quiet balcony, Owen King watched those same lights and whispered into the wind, "Tomorrow I'll try again." 1 year later, the city woke to sunlight that felt like forgiveness. The sky above Chicago shimmered clear and endless, as if it had been saving this kind of blue for something worth believing in. The banners outside the new community center fluttered in the breeze. Grand opening, the Aurora Women's Center, empowering women of color. Inside, the hall buzzed with anticipation. The scent of fresh paint and lilies filled the air. Camera flashes flickered across faces, journalists, donors, and dozens of young women in pastel dresses, their eyes full of cautious hope. Lucy stood at the edge of the stage, her palms trembling. It had taken everything, years of rebuilding, learning to forgive, learning to trust her own strength. She wasn't just here as a guest. She was part of the heart that made this possible. But she still didn't know what Owen had planned. He had been quiet these past weeks, unusually so. He'd insisted on organizing this event himself, telling her only that it would be the beginning of something new. And now, as he walked toward the stage, the applause began, warm, thunderous, sincere. He looked different from the man she had first met in the rain. Still elegant, still magnetic, but softer now, the arrogance replaced with humility. He took the microphone, scanning the crowd, his gaze pausing on her for just a second, long enough to make her heart remember every reason she had once walked away and every reason she had come back. "Good afternoon," he began, voice steady but full of emotion. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate, not just the opening of this center, but the beginning of something far greater. The belief that equality isn't charity, it's justice." A hush fell over the room.